Alright, so here are some questions that I can't answer about God. How does God think if God exists without time? Thoughts take time to work, correct? They must be processed in some order in order to make sense. That is, how can you say you're thinking? You're going from one thought to the next, right? You have to go in some logical order. So is there a timeless model for thought? Can you make a timeless model for thought? Perhaps you will have the answers to these questions. If so, feel free to leave a comment or make a video response. Does God have memory? Or should I say, does God have a memory? If God has a memory, did it include being aware of all memories simultaneously? Can God gain new memories? If God can gain new memories, then how can we claim that God doesn't change? Think about that. If God gains new memories, then how can we claim that God doesn't change? Furthermore, if God can gain new memories, how can we say that God is eternal? I wrote down notes for myself here, before I don't forget what questions I want to ask. If God is eternal, then he would have to have some sort of time to already have experience. If God is eternal, then he would have had the time to experience all experiences that can possibly be experienced, not just one time, but an infinite number of times. That means anything that God could possibly experience, he could have experienced an infinite number of times. So what new experiences could God possibly have? Can God have experiences? Okay, so let's say God can have experiences. So if God can have experiences, then God is adding new memories to his memory bank. Even if they're repeated experiences, such as, I don't know, like having the exact same experience twice, like me hitting a baseball the exact same way 2 times in a row. I guess you can call that experience, but then everything you're doing is repetitive. Done it infinite amount of times before. But hey, maybe you have a good answer. So then we have to conclude that God has experiences, right? So we must conclude that if God has experiences, that God has a memory. They go hand in hand, right? If God can have experiences, then God has a memory. Has to be that way. Can't be any other way. Unless, of course, God can't remember his experiences. Well, that's weird, isn't it? If God can't remember his experiences, then God can't remember creating the universe. And thus would have no knowledge that the universe was his. That's weird. God created the universe and doesn't remember doing it. Doesn't even know he's God. So he has to remember his experiences, right? He has to have a memory. Of course, if God has no memory, then that also means that God doesn't even remember things you've done. God doesn't even remember if... Oh, camera's geeking out. God doesn't even remember if you're good or bad. How is God going to work that one out? Can't remember if you're good or bad. So God must gain new memories. Seems to be the necessary true thing, right? God must gain new memories. But if God gains new memories, how can we claim that he has an infinite amount of memories or experiences? Think about that question. If God gains new memories, how can we claim that he has an infinite amount of memories or experiences? That is, how can we add to infinite? How can we add to infinite? If God exists without time, then how did God ever arrive at the moment in which he created time? I say God is without time, not outside of time. There's difference there. See, if God is outside of time, that means time existed already. Right? So that means God and time exist, so God couldn't have been created time. So I'm first working that the question is if God exists without time. There is no time. And if God exists without time, then how did God ever arrive at the moment in which he created time? Think about that question. That is, what propelled God forward through different moments to reach the distinct moment in which God created time? So, is time eternal then? Did God and time coexist eternally? Or does God and time coexist eternally? If God and time coexist forever, then how much time passed before God created the universe? Both points have infinite points before them, right? Now let's say you said, let's say here's an infinite line. An infinite line means it goes both directions. That's infinite time. You said he created at this point right here. Okay, cool. So it's infinite there on both sides of it. So what's the difference if I said, no, you're wrong, God created at this point? What makes this point and this point different? They both have infinite time before them. So it wouldn't matter at which point I said God created time. It wouldn't matter how long ago not time. Time is infinite with God now. It wouldn't matter at which point I said God created the universe. Whether God created the universe here is arbitrary. It's meaningless because it's identical. No matter how long ago you say that God created the universe, whether it was 1 billion years ago or 10 billion years ago or 15 billion years ago, it doesn't matter because it's the same. Whether 15 billion years ago or 10 million years ago, however long ago it was you claim you created the universe, it's the same because there's an infinite amount before, infinite amount and back, which means the creation of the universe is then arbitrary. Why would an intelligent being just arbitrarily create the universe? And then, if it has purpose, if he had intent, there's some purpose behind creating the universe, how can he do it arbitrarily? Think about these questions. These are just some of the questions I have. I have more. I can continue on with these different questions I have concerning God and time and stuff. Another one is about fundamentals. I don't know if I have enough time to go into the fundamental ones. Maybe I can make another video for that, or I can just extend this video, I guess, to 15 minutes, and that's kind of a long video, but is God fundamental? What I mean by fundamental is he doesn't rely upon any other attributes to exist. It itself is what it is. So a single attributed thing is that attribute itself. If I remove the attribute, I remove the thing. The thing is the attribute. That would be an idea of something that's fundamental. Does God have more than one attribute? Think about that one. Does God have more than one attribute? If God has more than one attribute, are any of them dependent? Do any of those attributes depend upon other attributes in order to exist? An example would be a proton. A proton is a positive charge. Well, that positive charge is dependent upon a certain arrangement of other attributes, or we can call them properties. That is, 2 up quarks, 1 down quark, and the gluons holding them together in that particular arrangement. It's only when the 2 up quarks and the down quark are held together by gluons in that particular arrangement that what comes into existence, it emerges from that very combination of those things, a positive charge, which we call a proton. That positive charge, however, is found nowhere in the gluons, and it's found nowhere in the up quarks, and it's found nowhere in the down quark. It only emerges into existence when that arrangement is there in that particular way. This is a dependent property or a dependent attribute. The positive charge depends upon all those the arrangement even of those other attributes in that particular way in order to exist. It therefore cannot be eternal. It cannot have existed forever because it must emerge. And something can't come to be, right? If it's dependent, it must come to be. And it can't come to be if it's eternal. This is a logical it's incoherent. It's illogical, incoherent means it can't happen, right? It's impossible. Okay, so if God has more than one attribute, and if I remove one of those attributes from God, is God still God? Think about that. Maybe one of the attributes is being eternal. If I remove that, is God still God? Maybe one of those attributes is being all-knowing, having a memory. If I remove that, is God still God? So, if God has more than one attribute, and I remove a certain amount of them, does God cease being God? Just like if I continually to remove attributes from an apple, there comes a point where the apple stops being an apple. The apple is relying upon all those attributes. It's dependent upon them, which means the apple can't be eternal. If godness, that is God's existence, just as the apple's existence is dependent, if God's existence is dependent upon many attributes, that is, if I were to remove enough of those attributes, God ceases to be God, then God is dependent upon those attributes. Why is God dependent upon his attributes? How can something be dependent and eternal at the same time? That is, think about this, right? If God has like 10 attributes, right? And God is not God without those 10 attributes, then God is dependent upon those 10 attributes. In other words, in order for God to be God, those 10 attributes must exist. They have to exist. And if I take a few of them away, then God ceases to be God. Then God's existence, the very nature of being God, godness, if you will, is an emergent thing. God emerges from those 10 attributes, like human consciousness emerges from many attributes. But time is necessary for something to emerge. That's why human consciousness can't be eternal, because it's dependent. Just like the positron, well, not positron, just like the proton, just like the positive charge emerges, so the positive charge can't be eternal. It's not fundamental. So, obviously we run into the problem of claiming that God is eternal if God has more than one attribute. However, if the thing is fundamental, having only one attribute, then it is the attribute. The thing is the attribute itself. If I remove the attribute, I remove the thing. It's not dependent. Such a fundamental thing can be eternal. It can be self-existent. But dependent things, things that emerge, things that depend upon many attributes to exist, like an apple or a positive charge or a negative charge, such as an electron or a neutron, these things exist only because of other attributes that give rise to its existence. And if I were to remove those attributes, the thing vanishes. If I were to remove one of the quarks, one of the up quarks from the proton vanishes. There's no more proton. The positive charge goes away. There's no longer a positive charge there. So, if I remove so many attributes from God, God vanishes. This means God, like the proton, is dependent. How can we claim a dependent thing is eternal? So it only seems necessary, in order for reality to work the way it works, since we know that things can come into existence seemingly out of nothing, the positive charge wasn't there in any of the attributes that make it up. It comes into existence, it emerges into existence based on the arrangement of other attributes. So rewind that back to the beginning, you have eternal attributes. One single self, each one is itself dependent. This attribute is one attribute only, it is the thing in of itself. This attribute is one attribute only, it is a thing in of itself. When they mingle together, emerges a third attribute. That attribute is not eternal. That attribute is not self-existent. It depends upon those other eternal attributes to exist. And when it mingles with those, and they all mingle together in different combinations, more and more complex attributes emerge. Until we get things like up quarks and down quarks, and things like neutrons, electrons, and protons, the building blocks of everything that is in reality. That's all that's necessary when you think about it. Eternal attributes. Single things that can itself be God. A single attribute can't be a God. It's just one single attribute. And this is one single attribute. And this is one single attribute. And none of them are individually God or gods. And they mingle together, and they give rise to more complex and more complex and more complex, until you have googolplexes of complexity, the universe in which we live in today. If you feel you can answer these questions, you have a greater mind than I do, and I'd love to hear from you. Alright, bye.